All right, folks. Thank you, everyone, for dialing into this webinar today. We're going to get started in just a couple of moments here. We're going to give it a couple more minutes just for folks to trickle in. But we're going to get started at about 5 minutes after the hour. So just hang tight and we will get started shortly. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started here as folks continue to trickle in. I want to thank everyone for joining us this morning or afternoon, depending on what time zone you're in, and joining us here for our webinar today, From Disconnected Data to Decisive Action, Insights from the Food and Beverage Industry. This is a webinar with Sourcemap and Salesforce, so thank you again for joining us today. So I want to quickly run through our agenda today. First, we're going to introduce our speakers, myself and my co-host here, Stefan. We're going to run through the current environment and struggles that we're seeing across the food and beverage industry and their respective supply chains, why these companies are struggling with their data collection and with regulatory compliance as they interpret and collect that data. We're going to talk a little bit about what Sourcemap and Salesforce bring to the table in terms of a combined solution as we collect and interpret and consolidate that data. And then we're going to walk through a case study. So we're going to bring to you a story from the industry, from the food and beverage industry. And then finally, we're going to open things up to questions. There is a Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you look all the way at the bottom, there's a little button that says Q&A. You can submit questions throughout the webinar. You can submit them either with your name attached or anonymously. Throughout the webinar, and we'll see them towards the end, and we will pull those out as we get to the Q&A section at the conclusion of the webinar. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can. So please submit those questions as we go along. So we're going to dive right in. So allow me to introduce my co-host, Stephen Muller. Stephen is the Global Director of Sustainability Transformation at Salesforce. He's part of Salesforce's Global Impact team. He advises Salesforce's strategic corporate clients on their digital and sustainability transformation journeys. His expertise includes corporate sustainability, transformation management, and environmental management technology. And he has over 15 years of experience in technology-led advisory. He is a board member of the Digitalization and Sustainability Committee at Bitkom. That's Germany's Digital Business Association. And he is a thought leader on the twin transformation towards a digital and sustainable economy. He has a background in environmental economics and political economy from the University of Munster, and he is a lecturer on biodiversity finance at the Frankfurt School of Finance and Management. And then finally, Stefan is based in the greater Frankfurt region of Germany, so we are on different time zones this morning. I am based in New York City. And finally, to briefly introduce myself, my name is Marissa Brock. I am the Senior Director of Policy and Government Affairs at Sourcemap. I manage Sourcemap's relationships in Brussels and in Washington, D.C., and I closely monitor the regulations that we support our customers with, both on the EU side and on the US side. And I hold degrees both from Harvard University and George Washington University's Trachtenberg School of Public Policy. So we're really excited to come to you today and talk a little bit about the food and beverage industry. There's a lot that we can discuss. This has obviously been a very interesting late summer and transition to fall in terms of regulatory news. So this is an opportune time to talk about some of these trends and talk about some of these opportunities to really consolidate this data and sort of talk about these respective work streams. So we're really excited to dive in. So we're going to start with the current environment and some of the trends that we're seeing in the food and beverage industry. So let's start with the top 3 trends that we're seeing across the industry and across supply chains today. So trend number 1, complex supply chains create a lack of visibility and access to data. So let's think about the world's largest companies and some of the industries that they represent. Oftentimes, these companies have hundreds, if not thousands, of upstream suppliers. These represent many, many steps across their upstream supply chain. Collecting this data, the data that's representative of these suppliers, can be incredibly time-consuming, especially when it is done manually. It can be tedious, it can be prone to errors. And as a result, companies really need automated solutions. They need automated processes to map and monitor and validate their supply chain data every step of the way. This is something that we've really been seeing for years. This is not a new problem. What's really changed over the last 10 to 15 years has been the need for these types of automated processes as a solution for regulatory compliance specifically. The need to collect supply chain data is absolutely not a new problem. Sourcemap has been around for 15 plus years at this point. We have had companies in the food and beverage supply chain that have been collecting supply chain data, in the early years of Sourcemap, and their use cases had nothing to do with compliance. They had nothing to do with regulatory compliance, I should say. They oftentimes had an ESG focus. They oftentimes had a sustainability focus. But now that we're in this environment where there are, a constant stream of new due diligence regulations that have this foundational element of supply chain visibility, which we'll talk about a little bit more throughout this webinar, that's really what the change has been, over the last decade plus. So trend number 2, perfect transition. Exposure to multiple regulations can lead to compliance challenges. I mean, this is the understatement of the year. At this point, it's rare, if not impossible, that a multinational company is only exposed to a single supply chain due diligence regulation. I mean, I haven't heard of one case where a company only has one due diligence regulation that they're worried about, and one regulation that requires them to collect supply chain data. In fact, most companies are exposed to at least 2 to 3 simultaneously. And, for the most part, each of these regulations have requirements that are distinct. There are some notable overlaps across essentially all of these supply chain due diligence laws, and that's really the foundational requirement of supply chain visibility. So, we can use a real world example here. Let's say you are a large food and beverage company that's based in the EU. You import a large quantity of goods into the United States. Your goods are coming from all over the world, including parts of Asia. Since 2022, you've been exposed to the US forced labor ban. And that means you've been required to map and monitor your supply chain for risk of forced labor. That also means that because of that forced labor ban, you have needed to collect chain of custody data. So that's transportation records, payment records, that kind of additional level of documentation that verifies and validates the respective steps of your upstream supply chain, to prepare for the possibility of a detention by U.S. Customs and Border Protection. That's a really specific requirement that is, to some degree unique for the U.S. forced labor ban, but you can see some overlap in terms of best practices for other due diligence regulations. While this is actually a requirement for the U.S. forced labor ban, it is a best practice for other due diligence legislation. But this same company, they also place soy and palm oil-based products on the EU market and export those products from the EU. That means they're subject to the EU deforestation regulation, which, as we know, there was a recent announcement that the deforestation regulation is to be delayed by an additional year, so to December 2026. It was originally meant to go into effect on December 30th, so in a little over 2 months. That law does not require full upstream supply chain mapping, so the collection of each individual actor in the upstream supply chain, but it does require you to collect geolocation data for all of the farms and forests from which the soy and the palm oil was harvested, screen those farms and forests for deforestation, generate due diligence statements to be submitted to the EU's unique portal, which is called EU Traces. And then it also requires operators to confirm that their goods were harvested legally. And some companies are electing to collect chain of custody data and documentation as an additional means of verification to confirm legality. So again, you're seeing that potential overlap in the type of data that company is collecting for the U.S. forced labor ban as a best practice for their compliance with EUDR. While not exactly the same, not one-to-one data, there's some degree of overlap there that they could be taking advantage of. So again, in this specific example, the data points are not exactly the same. There is some overlap. The company can benefit from identifying those overlaps and seeking out, those opportunities to consolidate that data collection and make that process as painless as it can be. It's always going to be a pretty significant amount of data collection, but to the degree that the company is able to streamline that and identify, where they can consolidate those processes, the easier of a time they will have with their compliance objectives. And then finally, trend number 3, evolving requirements and timelines leave companies unsure where to start. I mean, this one is really, really important, especially when we're talking about something like the deforestation regulation in the context of this recent announcement of the potential delay. As I've said, supply chain visibility really is a foundational element for most of these due diligence regulations. And many companies are waiting on additional guidelines for legislation such as the EU forced labor regulation, which is expected to go into effect in 2027, the EU battery regulation, which also would be 2027, and then the battery passport, the green claims regulation, if it survives, and then, of course, EUDR, as we await news of potential further simplification, and then obviously this delay to December 2026. But companies really should not be sitting on their hands and waiting, to see if a regulation goes into effect, or see if they, have an additional 1 to 2 years before guidelines get released. Supplier readiness takes time. Integration with their existing systems takes time. Delays really are an opportunity to get things right. And, Sourcemap's history and Salesforce's history in this space has really shown delays, frankly, are actually, to some degree, a gift for companies, that they really have an opportunity to get this right and really identify where are those gaps. Where are these opportunities where we're missing data, where we need to really better onboard our suppliers, where we need to better integrate our existing systems. And this really is not a time to as I said, sit on your hands and say, okay, now I can relax for the next 18 months. If anything, it's really time to, move full speed ahead and make sure that you are even more prepared so that when the regulations actually do go into effect, you're not scrambling at the last minute. So we're going to talk a little bit about why companies are struggling to adapt to these trends that we just discussed. First, it's really the issue of functional depth. Supplier data, the data that we've been talking about, it often needs supply chain experts to really dig deeper and pull out the insights that make that data useful across departments. It depends on the maturity of the companies that we're talking about, but those supply chain experts might not exist within these large companies. And so in some cases, you might not have those resources in-house. You might not realize what those insights are, what the sort of the strength of the data that you already have from your suppliers, and how to utilize it across departments. So that really is a challenge that needs to be identified with these types of solutions. And then there's really the challenge of looking at the big picture. When we talk about ESG, managers really need a consistent overview of all ESG aspects to really understand where their company stands. That requires pulling out the data points, generating insights, understanding what those insights mean in that broader context. And again, when you're pulling in the complexity of regulatory compliance in here as well, it's just adding another layer of complexity into this, where compliance teams are getting involved, legal teams are getting involved. The big picture becomes ever more important. So this is just, again, another challenge that companies are needing to grapple with. And then finally, there's really the ever-present challenge of connection and collaboration. And that's really why we organized this webinar today. Multiple departments need to work with data that's relevant to them. What ends up happening is these departments end up working in silos. They oftentimes waste valuable time gathering the exact same data in slightly different ways. They don't always share it across departments. They don't recognize how much time and effort they could be saving by consolidating these work streams. And, time is money, time is incredibly valuable. This is not something that some of these large companies can afford to be doing, where the same or different departments are collecting the exact same information in slightly different ways. So this is really a critical challenge that companies are trying to solve for, and sometimes don't even realize that they are guilty of, because they're working in such silos that they don't realize that they are even collecting the exact same data. So we've identified the problems, we've identified these challenges. We want to talk a little bit about the solutions. I will now hand things over to my co-host, Stefan, and we're going to talk a little bit about how we address these struggles together.
Down with the silos. Thanks very much, Marissa. If I would summarize up like your great part on the why, like why should we actually care about all of this, and why should we care about data in context of supply chain management, and why is it actually hard to do? I would summarize it that people, like, different roles need different things from the same data. You got experts that need details for their operations. You have managers that need context for their decision making. You got different departments that access the same data, but they need only the parts relevant to them, right? And that's easier said than done. So how are we actually going to go about it? And here's what we think. Busy slide, but let me walk you through from left to right. There's great value in having expert systems like Sourcemap. You need your supply chain experts, your professionals, to have an end-to-end traceability to raw materials. You need to have them, give them all the capabilities to gather supply chain data that they need for reporting to customs authorities. And then they need access to real-time risk assessment for ESG reporting that includes due diligence statements for EUDR compliance, etc. There's like a lot of depth that they need to dig into. And that's what expert systems like Sourcemap deliver. So that's cool. That's great. And you still have managers in different departments, or consider you're an ESG manager or a sustainability manager, and a compliance manager, reporting manager. So you might not be interested in all the details of the supply chain due diligence process, but you might want to work with the results of it. You might need a subset of that data, and you need to combine it with a different set of data. For example, if you're an ESG manager or a sustainability manager for that matter, you need that single source of truth that connects and manages all ESG data, including supply chain data, including due diligence data from that process, and combine it with others, because you need to report on it. You want to automate the reporting as much as possible on ESG disclosures, because, as Marissa said, time is valuable, and you want to spend your valuable time of your experts on those matters that really move the needle. So that said, moving the needle, that's the third bullet in the middle column here. How can we actually, get the tick in the box exercises done rather quickly, like gather all the data we need, compile the reports that we need to compile, and then also use that data to create value adding insights, value adding services throughout the organization. So what does that mean? That means, for example, you gather data on your supply chain, on your suppliers. You connect your suppliers to regions, to raw materials. You know exactly all the interrelations, and you want to optimize the operations. You want to identify where, for example, think logistics. Are we overspending? You want to understand ROI. You want to understand how can we calculate the ROI of investments. For example, when we invest in new supplier relationships. You want to actively manage supply chain risk and resilience. For example, again, understand how the raw material that you procure map to suppliers, map to regions. If you're from the sustainability realm, you understand that climate change is going to literally change an awful lot, because some regions will face water scarcity, some regions will face deterioration of the production. They'll produce less of a specific material, for example, and you're able to foresee that. You're able to generate that insight, to generate like an alert system, an alarm and alert system for your for procurement, for your product portfolio management. There's a lot of value in there. Even if sustainability is not written all over it, that data is generated, is originating from a sustainability management exercise, and then used to create value in all of in a set of different departments throughout your organization. Okay, and now if you move to the right-hand side here, that's basically when you combine the two systems. That's where the magic happens. When you have expert systems that go deep on very material, very specific processes, business processes, and you have a management system that's able to connect all of these expert systems for decision making, for greater insights, and that's how you can get the detailed data for your experts. You can prepare all the decision makings for your managers, and you have finally a place where many different departments can work on the same set of data through different lenses. Think supplier management, think reporting, think sustainability, think finance, for example, and accounting. There's a lot of value for all of these departments in the same data if we're able to contextualize it differently. Okay, that's very meta, very abstract, right? So let us drill into how that looks like from a technology perspective. That's again a very busy chart, but again, don't panic. I got you through that. So basically, we're getting a little technical now, and this is how such a solution could look like. It gets sustainability teams what they need from their tier 1 suppliers, and it allows compliance teams to conduct that supply chain mapping exercise that's necessary to satisfy regulations. So quickly explaining the picture from bottom up, So first of all, you have a great many internal and external data sources throughout your organization, external data sources you want to integrate. So you want to make sure that your corporation, your company has all the tools in place to integrate the data and feed it into that light blue box. The light blue box that you see there, that's Salesforce, that's the management system, that's that single source of truth I've been talking about. That's where also different modules for different expert teams live. For example, the green one, we call that net zero cloud. That's what we have on sustainability management, where sustainability pros sit. They do reporting, they do carbon accounting, they do program management and outcome management. That's what they do. On the same platform lives supply relationship management, completely different function, if you will, a role. But then again, they if they're working side by side on the same data, they get to learn, look, all the stuff that we collect on sustainability, that's super interesting. And also, if you're talking about our scope 3 supply chain emissions, we need to collect that data, right? We need to collect the data for our sustainability management team and report. So what if we would make that part of our supply relationship management as well? We would ask our suppliers for that data. We would get that data. We would make it part of our scorecard, etc. That's the beauty if those teams work side by side, integrated on the same platform. And now the yellow box at the top, that's where it becomes really exciting, because that's where Sourcemap is kicking in. There's integration between Sourcemap and Salesforce, and all the detailed due diligence you run on your supply chain, that is done by Sourcemap. And all the different process steps that you see here at the top, the data that's generated there, the due diligence statements that are generated there, all that can flow back into Salesforce, right? So you need Sourcemap as like your expert system to really, really dig deep into that supply chain due diligence, and then play that back into the larger management system to make that data also available for EUDR reporting, for any other sort of compliance reporting, and then also, as I mentioned, feed it into analytics that's creating way greater value than just compliance and reporting. That's like from an architecture view. Now let's talk a bit about like who did that already, who did that before. And what about that whole value creation paradigm, like moving from compliance to value creation? Like everybody talks about it, everybody like wants to go there, but like why and how does it happen actually? And before I move to the use case, to that industry story I want to tell you, let me open up with an analogy. And that's one I talk about it all the time. So if you, for example, think about sustainability, and if you move on one slide ahead, please. Here you go. Yeah, focus on value creation. So here is how I want you to think about it for a second. To me, sustainability today is what IT was 15 years ago, when I kind of started. IT was it was there in the enterprise. Everybody used IT, but it was kind of network services, data centers, and like desktops. That was IT back in the day. Not really interesting. You only notice it when it didn't work. Then something happened. IT became ubiquitous at some point in time. It permeated into every single business process, into every single product, into every single service. That's what we then called the digital transformation. And IT wasn't IT anymore. IT transcended into something that added way more value to the enterprise. That's why folks made up the term digital, not IT anymore, it's digital. I think we are at the very same point with sustainability right now. So if you consider sustainability, we're coming from that reporting kind of paradigm where everybody was pushed by by authorities to think about sustainability due to regulations, forced to think about it. I think now, further down the road, many companies, sustainability kind of transitions from a headline to a principle. It's not a headline about like for things that you do, but it's embedded in it. So what I mean by that, for example, sustainability, when we talk resilience and we talk about supply chain, I kind of made the point earlier that you might want to understand where the stuff that you procure that's going to be part of the products that you sell, where does it come from? Where does it originate from? And what's the risk that this kind of material or that the products that you're procuring won't be available for long due to, for example, environmental reasons? And there's strong evidence that things like that will happen. So once you understand that, for example, by using Sourcemap, you get to understand that you might want to change the way how you run your business. You might want to change what you sell. Actually, you might want to change some suppliers that you cooperate with. You might want to change how you actually how you incentivize your own suppliers to proactively mitigate the risk of not being able to deliver anymore. You know, and that's under the headline resilience. There's sustainability baked in, and sustainability thinking, understanding sustainability is super crucial. Having the data for it is super crucial. But then again, you don't use it as a headline anymore. It's baked in. Sustainability permeates into every single business process, every single product, every single service. We'll be getting there, slowly but surely, but we'll be getting there. So that's important. So if you have that in mind, go one step further. We see that. Yeah, we see that use case that I wanted to talk to you about. It's a retail and consumer goods company. It's all in flight, so I won't share the name, but it's an interesting story. And it all started with a single expert and a single mandate in a single silo. So that person had to make sure the company was compliant to EUDR. You know, that's all that person had at the time. And you can see the matrix here. And the business value of that initiative, of that exercise, was considered very low. You know, not like a super, you know, high value task at the time. And you see that the person sitting in a silo, just doing some reporting work somewhere, wasn't very well integrated into the business at all. Now, little more than 1 year later, that person and their team, they were super well connected with the operations department, super well connected with supply chain, super well connected with finance and accounting and IT. So what happened in between that first stage and like moving to the upper right? That person started to identify all the required data for the EUDR related supplier mapping. What Marissa mentioned before, digging for the data. What data do we need? What data do we have? What am I missing? Who has that data? Who might have that data? The person knocked on a lot of doors, started to work with Sourcemap to get their job done back in the day. And it became obvious very quickly that all that data that was generated there, crafted there, was of so much value for so many other departments. And they, these kind of stakeholders in finance, in operations, supply chain management, they kind of found that reporting person because it was, like it was going throughout the organization saying, "This is what I'm going to do. That's the data that I have. This is what I'm going to do with it." And fast forward, they understood that suppliers that are managing their material topics, like, for example, water scarcity, like resource availability, etc. That capability of suppliers to understand their impact on nature and impact on climate, that's a proxy for future business performance. That's a proxy for future business resilience. So the more we as a company invest in these kind of suppliers and push suppliers toward that direction, that they are that they generate more of their data themselves, that they are in active dialogue with us as a buyer, the more resilient is our own supply chains, the more resilient our own operations. So we're going to push in that direction. And that triggered a couple of other initiatives that you see at the upper right here. So the company decided, you know what, based on what we've learned throughout that process, working with that single silo person, with the sustainability department, finance, and risk management, supply chain management, let's launch a couple of other initiatives that were now considered higher value initiatives, higher business value. Let's think about how we integrate sustainability in our supplier scoring, into our supplier selection, into our supplier steering. How can we use those insights that we generate from there to also inform our own product portfolio management? So what I mean by that is, if a specific material or specific product is created, is harvested in a specific region, and we know, reading the IPCC reports, that that region will be hit by severe climate change in the midterm, right? So what kind of adaptation and what kind of mitigation strategies and action and corrective actions can we take today, right? And at that point, they've outgrown that it's a kind of reporting exercise motion towards this is strategic conversation. It's a strategic conversation for that company. And that is what I mean by getting from headlines to principles for sustainability, thanks to data, thanks to that kind of technology, and thanks also, as you see here in that story, thanks to transformation management, which it is by the end of the day. And let me close with, what did that person do right? Like what can you do today, right? If you want to go on the same path. And I summarized with three points on the next slide. The first one would be, again, start with data. If you're tasked with, even if you're tasked with like a tedious, annoying kind of reporting task, always ask, so what? Who could benefit from it? So why is this data important? And where is the data? What data do I have? What data do I lack? Where do I get the data from? Who's governing the data? And enter that discussion with those data owners and talk about governance, working out loud. Why you do that? Like, be very clear on what kind of data do you need and what you need it for, and what might be the next and the next step and the step after that, where you could process the data for greater value. Other people might be interested in it, so let those stakeholders find you. That's what that person did brilliantly. And last but not least, like, even if you're not from IT, especially if you're not from IT, like, IT is your friend, right? If you need data, IT has it, or they could get it. There are many places out there to get it from, and it's often, very often, when we embark on these kind of programs that are larger in nature or grow in nature, data integration, data connectivity, and making sense of the data, that's the single crucial point that not all companies get right. So IT can help you do that. And that's basically the door opener for a lot of stuff that you can do with the data, a lot of value you can pull out of it. So take your IT business partner out for lunch.
I actually wanted to expand really quickly on your last point here around IT being your friend, with just a quick anecdote of something that I've even just seen at Sourcemap over my last 5 years here. The importance of IT teams at the companies that we work with. As I said, in the earlier days of Sourcemap, which obviously predates my time at the company, since Sourcemap has been around for over 15 years, when the companies we were working with were really coming to us with priorities that centered more around meeting these internal sustainability objectives that they had set, as opposed to meeting compliance requirements. Our primary point people at those companies were oftentimes their sustainability teams, their, sometimes their procurement teams, their heads of responsible sourcing. But as regulatory compliance has really become sort of the centering priority for a lot of supply chain due diligence and supply chain data collection, I should say, obviously compliance teams and legal teams are in the mix. I think that sort of goes without saying. But to your point, Stefan, the data integration becomes even more important because there's already data that's being collected. It's become even more critical to integrate that data and make sure that it's getting to the right people, to the right place. IT teams are now oftentimes a lot of the teams that we are interacting with, and they're coming in earlier in the conversations, and the integration is becoming, much more critical in the conversation. So I think your third point here is well taken, that IT teams are incredibly important, and I think that IT teams know how important they are, but maybe outside of those teams, they are not as appreciated as they should be. But they really are really important for a lot of these types of projects. So just wanted to underscore that it's really they are really critical here. So we want to actually open this up. As I said at the beginning of this webinar, we want to allow for some questions. If you've had the opportunity to submit questions through the Q&A function, We will comb through some of those. Also, feel free to drop a comment or question. Comments are also welcome, doesn't have to be a question. If you heard something that inspired you, surprised you, or seemed to be beneficial, again, you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can also use the comment function. You should see that at the bottom of your Zoom screen as well. Oops. I see one question related to some of that, sort of a follow-up to what we were just mentioning around IT departments and sort of how they sort of come into the mix. Whether we see sort of a challenge across getting respective departments within some of these large companies to work together. When we're bringing in an IT team, and getting some of these departments to share data. Is this something that we see as a challenge, sort of getting these teams to work together and sort of getting these champions across respective departments? I'm happy to sort of start with what I've seen on the Sourcemap side, and then Stefan, I'm happy to kick it over to you. From our side, what we really like to emphasize here is, again, pulling out and identifying the areas in which this type of data can really be beneficial for these respective departments in order to get those executive champions at the department head level. What really can be a challenge when you're trying to get that buy-in, that kind of cross-departmental buy-in, is when you're talking about something like regulatory compliance, it's a little bit easier to get cross-departmental buy-in than sort of it was 10 years ago, when really, a project around supply chain visibility or supply chain due diligence might have been, focused on sustainability, and it might have been sort of just championed across one or two departments, as opposed to when you have legal pushing for something. I think that you can get a little bit more executive buy-in. So that has helped. I think I would be remiss to not acknowledge that having legal in the room certainly helps. But I think, frankly, really underscoring the importance and the importance of time saving here has helped get champions across departments, because that's something that, at least from my perspective, most executives across departments can get behind, even if maybe their department is not as bought into or as concerned with the regulatory compliance aspect, or the priority behind that respective project, that data collection project. When we're really underscoring, hey, this actually will save your department X, Y, and Z hours, which is something that from Sourcemap side, we really do try to pull out those stats and pull out those numbers and say, here's how much time you would have wasted if you did this manually. That's where we can really, push for that buy-in. It's always a challenge, but again, when legal is in the room, that always is a little bit easier than it has been in years past. But Stefan, I don't know if you have anything.
Legal helps, yeah. I mean, like getting that business value carved out is paramount as well, of course, right? The question is like how we do that, and how you get there. There's one thing I want to share, one observation that we see with very mature customers of ours and from our internal team as well at Salesforce. So these are kind of bridge builders, if you will, people that understand both sustainability and tech. You know, if you're working in tech, you're all about solutions, right? You don't necessarily know the problem space of sustainability. You don't know what carbon accounting is. You don't know EUDR. You don't know what any of that is, or why that matters, right? But you do know exactly your data architecture. You know data integration. You know a lot of that. That's cool. Then again, if you're a techie, go try talk to a sustainability manager. Right? It's completely different realm, completely different language, completely different mindset. As a sustainability manager, like whatever that specific domain is, supply chain or carbon accounting, whatever, you're super knowledgeable about the problem spaces. What do you need to solve, right? But you don't have always like the right tools to get it done. That's what you are teaching for. Now, if you have one or two people in your organization that have a background in sustainability and also have or go deep in tech or the other way around, like we have these people as well, you know, people that were formerly sustainability managers, then went back to school, did like a master's in data science and go back, and now I'm like both-handed now, right? I know the problem and I have I'm equipped to solve it in a way with the data that I have. And if we have these champions that can translate between the teams, right? So why is it important for me to get that data? Why is it important for me to get that extra data source added to our data lake? Because that's the question that as a techie I would ask you all the time. If I'm about architecture, I want to keep it lean. I do not want to have like a gazillion data connections. I do not want to have like a super complex landscape or add Sourcemap or Salesforce to the mix, right? So why should I do it? That's where you need your sustainability team. As you say, not just because I want it, yes, legal helps, but then also, as you say, like what's the business value of it? The thing that we talked about earlier, right? So what is like the next level value? One is reporting, then is steering, and then what kind of efficiency gains are we creating, or what kind of top line effectiveness are we adding to the mix? Like these are the things that will resonate a lot. So invest in that, bridge builders, I would say.
I think that's a great insight. And I think also a challenge, just a comment here, is a challenge that I'm sure Salesforce faces, that we certainly face at Sourcemap is, um, and this is not always dependent on the size of the company, because we work with, you know, companies of all sizes, but in general, companies that are large multinational companies, the maturity within the company in terms of their data collection, their own internal processes, their own, you know, levels of integration within their companies can vary pretty dramatically, and that can pose its own its own unique challenges and require you to sort of approach each company a little bit differently. Um, I'm sure that that's been a challenge that Salesforce has faced as well. But that always, you know, creates its own hurdles, but keeps things, I would say, keeps things interesting um, as we navigate this very unique landscape. Let's see. Stefan, I see a question in here that I think maybe you're best suited to answer. I see a question here that says, we have an internal IT department that supports Salesforce. However, that is on the commercial side of the business. How else can I get tech support? The tech support I need to set this up if I can't use my internal IT staff.
Well,
I don't know if you
lucky
want to answer that.
you. There's like a gazillion partners out there that support you with the technology and the setup of the Salesforce platform. So like speaking product names very quickly, like if that's something of interest to you, you would look after Salesforce Net Zero Cloud. There are partners regardless of whether you're based in EMEA or in EMEA, that support these, like all the big IT consultings and some boutique partners support this kind of technology setup.
Great. Excellent. Well, for folks who are not able to join this session, we were recording. So if you had any colleagues that were not able to join, we will circulate the recording to folks who are dialed in today. And please feel free to share with your colleagues. I just wanted to, again, extend a heartfelt thank you to my co-host, Stefan, but also to all of you who dialed in today on all of your respective time zones. Again, if there were any questions or comments that you might have that we didn't get to, or that you weren't able to share with us, please feel free to reach out after the webinar concludes, and we would be happy to answer them. So thank you all for your participation, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your Tuesday. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.